Continuing. If I sound frozen sometimes, it's because sometimes I'm not able to say all that I need to say in the manner that it needs to be said because the collective is not ready to receive that.
And relating to the things that we're going to refer and relate to. So I, as a being, know that I've come from this primordial instance, and it's moved through so many transmutations and permutations and transitions and evolutions. So skipping in between all of that, most recently, and I'll go with most recently, I was born in July of 1979, and I grew up in the state of Connecticut here in the United States of America. And on the surface, led a somewhat conventional life until a certain point at which it took the reins and started
So now we'll do the detailing part. Because I don't mean to leave these details out. It's just there's so much other information that keeps jumping around that they somehow just fall away. Not hiding behind the names of Nandas, that's just referring. That's the attribute of my spiritual power, my frequency. Z, XabNoNdaX, Xenix, Zox. The parts inside it, its components. In the fiction, Mr. Nobody was named in 1979 Brian, B-R-I-E-N, Gaelic. That's a Gaelic spelling, like O'Brien. In fact, my parents even had a joke. That was told to me so many times, it's as if I found it funny and repeated it. They wouldn't need to put the O there because they'd always be going, O'Brien. There. And I even hit with that too. Lord Ryan O'Brien of the clan O'Brien. My father's family was not O'Brien. That was his mother's family. His father's family was Joyce. And that Joyce would be the aforementioned, or in the previous presentation with Randy, and again mentioned later, referred to anyway, Grandmaster in prominent lodges, fraternal brotherhoods. If you want to know their names, you can seek them. I won't say them for their own sake. It's not mine to do so. Only as related to myself. My middle name given was Elliot, 2 L's, 565. That's the stack. When I began to unravel my friend, Samantha, I understood why this name was given. Elite, Elliot. Elite Brian Juice. It's a whacked out comedic ha 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 cult joke. Elite Brian Juice. Brian Elite. The very best baby Brian. Because we were batches. Batches of genetically preformed and prefabricated would-be children. planted in vitro and then born. That was the second time. And I will annotate clearly more clearly here, how to understand this thing I keep speaking to, deliberately by different terminology, called the cult of the bath. You all know it, every one of you ufology adherents know what the cult of the bath is. You just look at it like through some deviously dark yet romanticized way. Of the tanks full of limbs, blood, fluid, body parts. Of the aliens! They're not aliens. For fuck's sake. They're not aliens. They're yous. Kinda. They're their shadow version of you and I. They're our antithesis. They're our antithesis. They're doing the other thing. But your mind is so situated that your direct experience is filtered through the notion of alien, gray, reptile. Okay, end the cartoon now. Stop the video game. They're archetypal forces. Game over. Whether you're on DMT, LSD, or your own individual trip inside your own noggin. There's no aliens. They're all just part of the AI program. Your experience is real. No one can validate nor invalidate your experience. Doesn't mean it's how it actually is. All things as is are rudiment. Rudiment. Component. Force. Archetypal, original, emanating, dynamic. But filter upon filter upon filter upon tiresome, boring filter has caused the mind to experience aliens. And you will. Unless you go beyond that. Call them demons. Call them what you will. They're archetypal forces. And I'm not talking like those who say, it's just psychological. Or no. Nothing is just anything. It is a psychological phenomenon. Psyche is your soul, is your mind. As we previously discussed, laid out so thoroughly. There's nothing you can experience that is experienced besides what the mind is experiencing. So I'm not dismissing your direct experience or your conceptualized contrivance. Let's just use some terms that don't send us into different fantasies, that don't help us understand how actual spirit grounds itself into the walls and floors and trees and rocks and mountains and so on around us, because it's not going to help us to see through mountain, to see through tree, to code, so we can heal, so we can come together, so that our mind, psyche, soul, sense of being can experience love and harmony, that we can produce something again in this cosmos called beauty. Stop talking of aliens. You're producing them. Yeah. You're propagatively producing an archetypal structure, an energy, an epigenetic sequence. It's called aliens. Do you like that? Do you like demons being victimized? You're victimizing demons instead of doing your work. Get it? You're making the demon a monster. Forget the demon. Do your work. Stop having conversations about the monstrosities of demons and do your work. Yes, they've come to take form in the form of the overbearing gods, the out of balance masculine, out of balance feminine. Yeah, they have form now. They have agents. They have agency in the form of these janitorial grays. The gray eye. And down to your CIA and your FBI and your local police officer. The next individual got a tattletale on your life. Bring some mischief and chaos, dysfunction, drama. Stop demonizing the demon. Stop making the demons victims of that monstrosity. Take power to do your work. Yes, they're in control. And when your body expires, or when your body has a glitch, when the Matrix has a glitch, they're going to screw with it. They're going to adjust it. They're going to do all the things that we've been told they do by the ufology world. It's all real. Do not mishear me. It's all real. But the perception, the filter, the interpretation of the experience is not empowering. You're disempowering yourself, and further, you're being lazy. You're not taking responsibility to handle that. Don't start with me, abductees. Don't start with me, with your sad stories, because I'm an abductee. In quotes. Yeah, I went through all of that as a child. Constantly taken. I lived through those perceptions. They're fake. At a level of authenticity, it's not how it is. So I'm one of you. So don't start that. Don't start the sequences of emotions and the intermotions of mind. Sad, invalidated, spit at, traumatized further. Stop. Decide that what you want is power. Because if you don't have power, you can't love. And if you don't have power, you can't care. So take your power to your center and understand this experience as it is. Wicked? Yes. Yes. Wickedness. No, I'm not asking you to empathize with your perpetrator. I'm not asking you to re-understand it as okay. It's not okay. But you need to have love for that enemy if you're going to heal it. It's wicked! So-called aliens, angels, demons. Wicked! The emanative source of sociopathy, so-called sociopathy and parasitic affects here. Evil. But we need to heal evil. So use your mind. Don't make it okay. But bring it together and understand it as it is. Your job to help heal that wickedness. Cult of the bath. The bath. It's every picture you've ever been given of underground bases. Dumbs! With the aliens down there, chopping people up, eating kids. Yep. Every version of that goes into cloning. Goes into genetic tampering of all kinds throughout the millennia and aeons and versions of the Matrix. Altering the substance and situation, the scenario, the constructs of soul. It's really simple. It's really simple. You exist as patterns, the patterns of your DNA. They are wont to do things, to deliver things, to become things in the body, to fulfill their destiny. It's written in your code. It's not deterministic. It's not determinate. It is your destiny. It is what you are duty-bound, destined for. It's the trajectory set on your GPS, your soul GPS. But it's not deterministic because you have the ability to choose to not do it, to be self-serving, to be destructive and chaotic and even destroy, to intend and attenuate toward generating oblivion while just deteriorating the very fabric of our existence. But you're called to more than that. You're called to be a healer. A healer. The bath, the tanks, the fluid, the substance of life. The fabricated, simulated, Sims-like, formatted, pre-construct matrix, the holograph that we're all living through, as though in. That's the bath, and you all know all about it from your ufology. Just go down all those little trails, but understand your ufology for what it is. A bunch of corrupted beings, entities, individuals, acting corruptly. The underworld, carrying on like sequences of patterns and ignorance, perpetuation, tokens, orcs, even Saruman and ultimately Sauron. Ignorance, hell-bent on destruction and demolition. Because separation, because entropy, because waking up authentically is the counterforce to laziness. So induce fear from laziness and perpetuate deterioration and self-serving ends. Even any self-serving ends. That's what it does. That's what it is. That's the bath. We'll just throw you in the pool, start you over. It doesn't start over. It just gets compounded. Because it's impounded. We are all impacted. And by virtue of this, called to legitimate responsibility to respond effectively to this station which we are. Responsibility begins when you absolve yourself of the Fox story and the drama and have nothing to do with that, and proactively take hold, seize hold of it that would be the kingdom, the heaven, the harmony, beauty, the love that can come forward. That you have the ability to be. If you do it. If you do it. You have the potentiality to be it. If you become it. If you rise to heaven, get yourself out of the bowels of hell, balance the alchemy in your body. That's why you're here.
Hello and welcome to Our Planet TV. I'm Randy Moggins. It is the 6th of January. A lot of what we talked about then has to do with the shift in consciousness, and I held a press conference where he announced massive pushback, and we're going to see basically a flame war occur on the tour. And it's good to see you on screen. We did an interview years now.
Well, Randy, I'm going to question that's experiencing from, or at least relating to, then we need to clarify some of those things. So, one term I would use that the ancient Hebrew sources use is to refer to the station that we currently find ourselves in as the Afid Lavo, or Atid Lavo, or Asid Lavo, depending what you want to do with that letter. I call it the Afid Lavo, which means the age to come. Many of the other world's prophetic systems have a term for this, but it's sort of an antechamber, pre-chamber. And I say we, meaning the general conceptualization is lacking to the nature of this station. Again, I'll use that term that we find ourselves in. So not knowing that, it makes relating to things like the Bundys. What is a Bundy? What is that? As a human that's at least there's a human body moving around in a land, and a building at a place to give itself a title. What is that? What is that? What is a human?
Please excuse my losing place, rolling back through. But I hope, as it travels back through this small portion that we're backtracking through, the elucidation of the crypticness is becoming less cryptic, more experienced, directly, hoping.
So-called by body anyway. So we need to break through these experiences we're having until we get to the core of what's actually going on, because we have beings that do exist at different spectrum of awareness of their being. The nature of a discussion like this leads to fierce abstraction. I suppose that sort of abstraction is the quality of gnosis itself, and very carefully referring and relating to the things that we're going to refer and relate to. So I, as a being, know that I've come from this primordial instance, and it's moved through so many transmutations and permutations and transitions and evolutions. So skipping in between all of that, most recently, and I'll go with most recently, I was born in July of 1979, and I grew up in the state of Connecticut here in the United States of America. And on the surface, led a somewhat conventional life until a certain point at which it took the reins and started exploring. And some of that exploration led me beneath the surface to understand that my life was not as conventional as I may have believed, neither for itself nor for what was underneath it. So that being said, I could fill in more detail. where we could talk about Oregon and anything else in between.
That being just said a whole bunch. That being just said a mouthful. But you have to hear. There's the pierce between the lines.
Let's unpack a little bit more about what you talked about in terms of your upbringing, because again, these videos and these audios go in different places. So part of your background obviously had to do with your background.
Your upbringing. Your upbringing. Me here. Your upbringing. For those concerned, this is my mother. Surprisingly, she also has a mother and a father. The mother had a mother. It's also shocking. And a father. At great-grandparent level. The mother's 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 mother, or whatever. No, the mother's mother's mother. That was one too many. You counting? The great-grandma. That's a Transylvanian, Romanian family. As I was told, made to understand by those who know these things, because they keep track of these families for the purity of their bloodline. The long-standing rabbinic family, tracing its roots to King David, a authentically Judean line. Exciting, yet not really. They're very twisted, dark warlocks practicing blood bath ritual. Anything that just sounded really prestigious just got thrown into the garbage bag. And then there's the dad's side, the great grandpa there. That guy is a Bavarian Prussian. And in all aspects of this family, they're a mystery in Romania. They came over from Austria, Germany, Bavaria. And they appeared and they began doing what they always do, taking over positions of power, mayoral, governor, so on. Jew and non-Jew in this name is arriving Prussians into Romania. There's a few generations down of this family, and they intertwine and first cousin themselves around the other family. That's all supposedly Jewish. One line certainly Hebrew, Judean, authenticated. The other Prussian, Aryan. They trace Aryan, not Khazarian. They're not like the Aryans, Khazarian, it's Ka-Aryan, like the Aryans. They would be the Aryans. Russians. Go research. And then, like I said, Mom had a dad. Dad's dad was Hungarian royalty, lower Hungarian royalty, Dukes Balog. Oh, his name. Oh, name. Balog Dukes, not Jewish. This individual converted to Judaism. Found out simply in my later years, because he fell in love with a Jewish lady. Because he was at the time of the Duke Ferdinand scandal that began World War I. He was involved with those involved, and who would convert at that time? Well, love, the pulls of the heartstrings. Fell in love with a lady, became a Jew. ostensibly. Found out from a relative he wasn't very practicing. He just needed to convert so that he could marry the woman. Who's never heard this story? And all the different faiths of the world. Become part of our tribe so you can be part of our children and have children. Our kind. He was married to a family playing Hungarian. He was in Hungarian family, Feldmar. And that's that little bunch. This line, the other line, then back to the slight trip back to the mom's line, that Prussian line, were Habsburgs. Noting Habsburgs, Kaiser Wilhelm's crew. This segment, Habsburgs. There's Hungarian royalty and plain Hungarian Jew family. That's about the simplest. That's probably the simplest there is in my line. There, that little thing there. More toward that later. Dad. Also had a dad. Again. Whoa. And he had a mom. His rhetoric was that they were totally Irish. And then he did the genealogy one day. And Dad's mom and Mom's mom were German. So Dad would say, yeah, I got some German in there somewhere. It's like, Dad, that's not some German in there. That's like your 50% German, man. The German families are important there because they trace Hanover line. Swiss, Drush, and direct Germanic, Gauler, your Habsburgs. Again, the mother's line there is O'Brien, the clan of O'Brien, and Joyce, directly related to James of said name. Blah, blah, blah. And those were my handlers, because I am not related, I am formated. But we have crystal blood, so we take the contours, even an allele, cultivated, of our Cide family. I'm not going to explain that now. Dive into the bath. You'll understand. Where? You won't, because you're not meant to.
On education, the fact that you were brought up in sort of a mixed family in terms of both faith and race, and then also the influences that came from, shall we say, outside of your family sphere, and anything you wanna
Sure.
bring into that.
Okay, so some of what I want to get into tonight is narrative, building narrative, the art of storytelling, and it dovetails into dealing with attributes and individuals as vectors in the alternative media, and what psychic hygiene is, and why so much of the alternative media lacks sanitization, and what it is to have sanitization in a network of corresponding vectors or individuals dispensing data in compartmentalization from each other, and how this often leads to a game of telephone and a bunch of indirect experiencers, and how that further...
Now, before that becomes anything that's, the hell is he just doing? I was making a stop sign. Stop sign. It's a bunch of vectors. Visceral. Stop sign. We're storytelling. was pointing at Randy. I was pointing at me. Stop sign. That's it. There's no ritual. If that's all you cared about, go back to sleep.
There's a emergence of, well, it's a psyop. I mean, it's a literal psychological operation of vectors.
Hold on. PSYOP! Alert! No. No. The context of a psychological operation is that it's happening in the mind. The context of a psychological operation is that it's happening in the mind. The context of a psychological operation is that it's happening in the mind. Program, 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 mantra, mantra, mantra. The context of a psychological... ... You are the psychological operation. You're the psyop. Your life is a psyop. Himmler's wet dream. Ashladai Valzavuv. Azazel, Samael, all having their way with their buddies via your life through these entities like Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, Bormann. Forget their names. Forget their names unless you want to permutate an occult and understand the relevance that the entity chose for them to have. You're the psyop. Because you're perpetuating that story. Story.
It's a vector. I mean, as soon as I put out noise or I move, every frequency generates an output, and that output is a vector into the field of reality. So if you have information coming from XYZ source who gets out on the internet and says this bit of information, and then somebody else piggybacks on that, all indirect experiencers, where the sanitization comes in. We say we have to clean this up. Where is the source? What is their source? And oftentimes it's a series of shadow operatives just distributing.
That's somebody playing baseball. Somebody threw or hit a ball. Somebody else caught the ball. They threw it somewhere else. Get it?
Phone call to somebody doesn't know who that their inside source is really just putting out information that's correct but colored. Let me use that term. It's colored, and then mouthpiece, who again popularity, says the colored information even more colorfully because it sounds cool, and they're going to get more hits if they dress it up. And they're...
Hello? Did you know my walls were colored by the blue avians? No, I shouldn't mock. No, I was just shat on by the blue birds. I explained it.
There's a large vector that starts to emerge. So now it's coming to the audience from a series of indirect vectors. How is the audience receiving that information really going to benefit and grow, even if there is what to take out of that information, when the information itself is coming from a very indirect experiencer whose frequency is only from a game of telephone. And then it gets more insidious from there.
Now, let's face it, we all do this to some degree or another. And certainly on the internet, the standards of what used to be called journalism have pretty much been snuffed out at this point. There are good researchers, there are ways to do original open source research on topics and subjects. There's experiential, anecdotal type testimony that's given, and yet all of that gets colored, all of that gets blended into what Marshall McLuhan called the medium. The medium is the message. Therefore, the medium itself is formed, as you were talking about with frequencies earlier, by the overall message. It has a context, but the context shifts and morphs as the underlying story takes on more and more detail, sort of like a snowball going down a mountain. So we all do this to some degree, and you're talking about cleaning it up, right? So
we need to. I mean, that's okay. So this is gonna. If I didn't answer your question directly, I didn't misunderstand or forget the question. But to go back to the beginning, to understand the nature of the Athi Bhavo, this thing, this dynamic that we are existing in at this time.
What? Do you ever attempt to get a camera to take a picture of itself? That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. How do you comprehend the thing when you're the thing? I understand that guy is the thing. Taking it apart. Taking it apart.
Is to understand that we are here to tell stories, to build narrative. It's the trajectory that we want to pursue in doing so. So yes, we are all doing that with greater and lesser degrees of intentionality. At a certain point, the question is, why are some people telling the certain stories they're telling? Do they even know? Are they, did they niche into the alternative world because they had a sort of a knack for that kind of information? It gave them a sense of importance to claim that.
Important information. Like, what time of day this Manchurian candidate is going to stab himself in the eye? Important information relevant to your life. Totally. Really? I need Tom to tell his Manchurian candidate story so that I can tell mine better. Because, yeah, important information.
And then at a certain point, let's say they were playing, and then they looked like a useful tool, so something else picked them up and started to use them as a distribution base for information because they have an audience, they have people who listen to them, they're a known mouthpiece. Why did they...
If Jerry and Jim and Kim and Molly get used to Tom and saying with Bob about the XY blob zob monster, and today the XY blob monster went to the White House and ate several other smaller XY zoom monsters. The reason that they did this was because Hi, I'm Diane Sawyer from Fox News, and today we're covering the consumption of the XY Clip monster. Did you know the XY Clip monster is actually a reptilian from Artazacatia? By the way, the XYZ monster is actually a reptilian from Arcatotomio. Pause. Now, Arcatotomio may be an individual's reference point to something directly experienced, something real in consciousness. Wonderful. Now, how can we access the dynamic called archetypalium, whatever? What does it do to build up the body? How does it help us know ourselves? It's okay to tell a totally fictitious story if it represents some quality of your narrative. If you want to make the whole damn thing up, go for it. But you better do it in a way that helps others. I'm acting. I'm playing. But I'm not playing. The nature of plausible deniability, the attribute of ability to be discredited, is rife within these narratives. Who cares? We should care. Not that the masses can't entertain the strata of this information, but the information is nothing to help us help each other, except spin more interesting stories. Blah, blah, blah.
What motivated them to step into that stream of information? That's then there's deeper levels. There are some that are direct FBI, there's CIA, there's shadow operatives, they're even worse than me, and they've come in deliberately to.
I heard the Exlazillatron Z monster's dog was FBI. I helped stow the fur onto him. Did you know that fur came from Nebraska base? Where, what? Maybe it did. Maybe you did. What do I do with that information? How am I going to serve my sister and brother in the body of our collective being better by knowing that that dog's hair came from the dumb under Nebraska? Tell me that, and maybe it does. Maybe I need to learn that the hair on my ass crack was also formulated in the dumb in Nebraska. To know that a certain flaw in my character is because of some program that's running in the ass hair in my ass crack that was formulated in the dumb under Nebraska. I'm not denying the story, but what the fuck purpose does it serve? If I'm telling my story, I'm telling it as a narrative that I will use as a reference to give power to others in dynamic that then will serve all of us.
Generate a certain composite of information. I don't believe that's correct of most. I believe most are just pulled in for one reason or another, and then they're just like all things throughout our, at least the last 6,000 years of known history, they can be picked up and turned by the greater AI, the great AI that's manipulating this field called the Atid Bavo, that it can be used to confound ourselves from each other, which again goes back to the necessity of speak as a there's a useful aspect and difficult aspect of speaking in such abstraction to stay away from over associating to this thing or that thing in the way it coming back to narrative, squaring back to narrative, my narrative, which was the direct question. So
now, if you're going to land your UFO in the field in Nebraska, you might want to learn, you know, the non-plane, aviational, planigrational term of how to land a UFO. There was a whole group that used to learn how to land UFO closures, O's, EI, cheerio.
I grew up in a small town in Connecticut called Bristol, just outside of Hartford. I was born to my dad's family was ostensibly Catholic. I say ostensibly because they weren't really practicing at a certain point. And my mother's family was ostensibly Jewish, also not heavily practicing. My dad's family, his father was actually the Grand Master of one of the prominent lodges, and again, not the Masons, but one of the major lodges in the country. He was, for a good portion of his life, the Grand Master. Didn't know that till more recently, just another confirmational vector for me. But the family's bloodline, that family are Hanovers on the German side, and the other side is very Irish.
But you need to know.
And skipping out of that for a second to my mother's side, who were on the patrilineal line, straight back. They were Hungarian royalty.
You know me.
Who
cares?
On the matrilineal side,
Do you care?
it's a really heavy line. They are, they trace to King David. They were a Romanian rabbinic family out of Transylvania. Again, that's an ostensible story. They're actually warlocks, High Transylvanian warlocks. That's a deeper cult reality. But this is back engineered and understood, tracing those lines and understanding what those lines actually are.
Wait.
I was given.
I got it. Did you figure it out? I figured it out. Oh, I'm not just telling my story. I'm telling you there's a story that I get to know because I'm involved, but it's not about me. Did you figure that out? It's not about me. It's about, I actually firsthand understand who these individuals are. They're my assigned family. That's knowing directly this group. That's why I'm telling that story. Sorry if it was boring you. And intriguing to know juicy details of you at the same time.
The hospital that I was born at, I came out the flesh at. I was given the name Brian, Brien, Gaelic spelling, because there's all the in the fiction. Everything in the fiction is plausible deniability, not on the governmental level, on your own occulted life level. For each of us, everything has an occulted key, and again, there's a spectrum of more deliberateness and less deliberateness. And if you're dealing with, say, I'm in my 30s, my parents are just passing into their 60s, that generation between 50 to 70, maybe that's a little far on the higher bracket, that generation largely unaware of their involvement in the cult in all capital letters, the satanic cult, because
I didn't
they have
say
amnesia.
satanic, I said saturnic, but I mumble sometimes. When I'm in a certain mode, sometimes I mumble. So in case you heard satanic, I have a very particular definition of satanic. That's just being a fuck, and I defined it before. I said saturnic, of the cult of Saturn, satanic. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. I just said Saturnic. Saturn, the Roman archetype, Saturn. Not the planet, what? Planet. What? Planet. It's in the sky. It's in the sky now, so showed me it. The archetypal energy, Saturn. The being, the entity, the Roman configuration, Saturn, that in Greek is Chronos. Kronos, Father Time. In Mesopotamia and Canaan, El was known as Saturn. The same entity, the same archetypal force was El, which becomes Yud. Hey. Hey. See, two different altars said them. Fucking kidding. Anybody start anything? It was a joke on Orthodox Torah Jews. I didn't take the name in vain because two different authors said it. It's a joke. It's a joke. Yehovah was, is, and will be. That's what that word stands for. Y, H, V. The V is a vowel. H. It's not a V, it's a W, it's a Wav. It's not a consonant there, it's a vowel. There's no such thing as Yahweh, there's no such thing as Jehovah. That was a error. That was a clerical error. The Kabbalists used to write out the name Yud, He, Vav, He. Y, H, V, H. And then they would put the other name, Adonai, the Master. Adonai is like Mr. So-and-so. Adonai is a name said by Torah practitioners in prayer to refer to the name Yud-He Vav-He that they just simply call Hashem, the name. Because Yud-He Vav-He is flying around on a Zimbabwe, Shimyaza. What are these words? Forget it. They're more narrative. The important part is the archetype. Time was, is, will be. It's not a word. The Kabbalists used to put the word Adonai, Aleph, Dalet, Vav, Nun, Yud, inside, in smaller letters, to the Yud, He, Vav, He, and the German scholars read it like it was vowels. They fabricated the idea of Yahweh or Jehovah. It's not a word. It's a descriptive acronym. And ultimately in Paleo, it's an expressive term to release, manifestation, vectors of time, past, present, future. The same is as El, as understood as entity called Saturn is Chronos, time. Father of chaos, the chaos of time, vector. That was a little ranty. That's a little randy. But you probably understood. And if you didn't, rewind.
Spells, they have compartmentalization. It's very small percentage of that generation that actually know what they're doing. Their parents still largely knew what they were doing, but the generation that would be my grandparents' generation. But as you know, testimony from Jay Parker, you have 10% of Americans who are involved in broad cults, and I would say a very tiny percentage of that 10% actually know they're involved because they're compartmentalized vectors.
Yeah.
This gets into what Nietzsche would call meta-mem psychosis. I have a close friend that I had in Connecticut, Dr. Michael Ben-Avi, who is ostensibly a child psychologist at Yale.
Dr. Michael Ben-Avi does not support anything I say. We don't talk anymore, not out of malcontent with each other. We just lost track of each other. Dr. Ben-Avi has no concept of my concepts and has been hereby disclaimed from any connection to any of what I'm saying. He's just my friend, and he does some very interesting work at understanding life through metaphor. That's all. What was he saying? What is he saying? Metamorphosis grows the metamorphosis, meta-emphasis, meta, beyond, meme, psychological, of the mind, of the soul, of the memes, of the repetitious patterns and compounded information sequences, meta, beyond, programmed, composited sequences in the mind, metamempsychosis. You're acting out in the fiction a metaphor for what you want to be and represent. Whether you're doing what you're supposed to, or you're not.
University, but his actual work that he's done is in metaphorical application of living life through fiction. So at that level, it gets into something that my direct handler, as I mentioned last time,
My direct handler. No. So, I was like, sort of, I guess I got it. Anyway. So I grew up in this little town. Actually, it's a big town. It's a big sprawling town. It's not a city. It's called Bristol. Nearby was where I was born, a city called New Britain. And there was an old synagogue with an even older seeming rabbi. Just conceive of rolling together Yoda and the Emperor. You get some of the sense of what that felt like. I grew up going there on the high holidays, as they're called. My Hungarian grandfather, my Romanian grandmother. But those who were there were not simple people. My handler, he would tell me, they're not simple people. They're normal people. Not dealing with normal people. It was a collection of entities that were involved in the bath. A very strange place to walk into as a child. That was a very sub part of my life. I was there a total 2 to 5 times a year as a youngster, a youth. I grew up more going to toward the Orthodox side, conservative synagogue on Friday nights, occasionally popping into a Catholic church on a down day with my dad, until he left that because of his studies and became a born-again Christian. He was very studying. He was always studying something. That's what he did when he wasn't doing his factory work job as a skilled welder, technician. He was learning. So he rolled over into the evangelical circles. And then there was some major tumult in my family. My grandfather passed when I was 8, but I believed it was 9, which is part of my MKUltra veneer. When I hear a real veneer one day, I'll tell you that story. But how you have a veneer of forgetting when you were 8 years old, and your grandpa died when you were 9 years old, and you can picture all your classes and like the whole scenario because it was induced. It's a veneer. It's not an altar. It's a veneer. Very specific, if anyone cares. We should care. We just get out of our veneers. That's the point. He left a bunch of property and some stuffs. When that fell apart in his passing, there's a number of years that passed by, and it split us from that, my mom's side of the family, because of dynamics of power and a little bit of money. There's a lot of money, but I mean a little bit of the aspect of money. We never saw any, because the money got eaten into itself by mishandling. But anyhow, in that wake of those occurrences, my father had also been discovering the Messianic Jewish movement, which is what I spent my formative years growing up in. I got to be around many different heavyweight scholars in the movement and take opportunity, someone they saw with talent, prodigial talent, to be around them and take whipping and cultivating, mental enhancing by being around their brilliance, maybe. It started me on a path of discovering.
W would say often.
That path of discovery led me out of the Messianics. I had to do a ton of reading to get there. So I need to be sure. That's just my nature. So when I went out of the Messianics and I went into mainstream Orthodox Torah living, I went, of course, and there was a precede that prior Rosh Hashanah. I was 17 years old. I went to this rabbi. There's so much more I could fill in. That's not just for me to narcissistically spin my tale, but that's useful information. But I won't now, except to say this. That is how, in Purim, in February of 1997, I came face to face with W, my handler. And I became his whipping boy in the real world. No, in the Fox world. In the walking about life. And he said all sorts of interesting cryptic things that eventually helped me wake up and toto. Among them were, there's no such thing as fantasy.
There's no such thing as fantasy. It took me a long time when I was 19 and I started hearing him say this to grasp the fullness of that effect. Understanding that the real world, as all the esoteric tells us, is the mental world. So when you start putting in a simpler sense and maybe more approachable, like in a literature class, sometimes a professor will say, you write to learn. You write to learn what you know. As you write, you discover what you have inside you. You didn't even sometimes on a simple level realize something you forgot about your past or something you learned at one time and you write, or you just, or in the bigger picture, you start to understand more dimensions of what you know by the process, oftentimes aided by actually that, old-fashioned pen thing or pencil thing, or you literally write it out.
Right. We talked about that, the ability to connect kinesthetically to the act of communication. Yeah.
In the same way, when we storytell, we're developing parts of ourselves that are there. They're not Fox, but we need to unpack them So in the process sometimes of spinning what may start out as fantasy, you may start to uncover a more sourced and rooted reality that's beneath, and that's a helpful process to get in touch with that. Now, going back to, say, my past, my personal past, or the Bundys, the Oregon, all these different items that affect, or just spinning narrative as fantasy, or the alternative media in general. Well, the issue is, and it's a complex issue, but it's very real. Where is past, present, and future? So if I start putting out a bunch of information into a field, a data field like the alternative media, well, then it's like you said, it starts to spin and or reorient some of what's out there. And you take that clay and you shape it like this, and somebody adds, you're making a round shape, and somebody puts an eye on it, and then somebody sees, I believe that's an eye.
Eye on what? Eye on what? Ionic.
Put another eye, and someone has a mouth and a nose. So, it's a very deep philosophical question. Philosophers, I talk tonight. Philosophers have asked, was the face there before? The shape? Was the face coming in? Was it emanating?
Yeah.
When is now? When is now? So did the Bundys exist? Did 9/11 exist? These programs, these layers, these strata that are running. Where's the future? Did what was added to the field?
The future is now. I was told that once. How could it be otherwise? Sorry, I'm out of time.
Change or the mind that may have planned to come in and add that to the field 5 years from now, affect the field a priori. Complex. These are very
A priori. The necessity of something to come before something else. By necessity.
complex questions, but they're very important questions. When you go back, there's different, the most recent one.
Why the fuck does he talk like that? Should ask him. Should probably ask. I'm asking. Why do you talk like that? Fear of abstraction. Careful for referring to what you're referring to in the moment you're referring to, because something might be frequently attacking some other frequency, so it's easier to abstract and absolve into disillusion.
My mind is Fringe that illustrates this. The series Fringe. There's plenty of other movies, obscure sci-fi movies, that show this, but it's in the ancient text. Understanding that there are what the Book of Enoch talks about. There are these
Ancient text.
Anunnaki. I don't like terms and names because they say,
I agree. Yeah.
Come to certain people in certain ways, and suddenly they bring up a whole context of it, and maybe unnecessary information.
My own names, those are facetious. Enoch, Hanoch, says he is the only individual in the Tanakh, Torah Ketuvim Nevi'im, the Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim, the Torah, the prophets, the writings, so-called the Old Testament. One day it just wore out so much they decided it was so fucking old. Zarian replacement theology. Okay, anyway. The book of Enoch is regarding a character mentioned in Genesis, in the Torah, called Hanok. It's the only individual who says, he was and then he wasn't. And then a bunch of lore sprung up around that. The book of Enoch talks deeply of this individual and what we call Enochian, Anunnaki. Puranas have something to say of these individuals, these humanoid, human our counter thesis. The left here as thesis, but then we're converted. Left to where? Under what? Where, how, high? Who, ho, hey, ho, hi, ho, ha, ha, how? Who, hey, hey, hey? I'm not joking with you. It's not funny. It's just like weird. They went away with all their technology, preserved technology, then they oversat and overlaid. Like this is an overlayer. This is a layer over that layer. We can make another layer and then stash it away in our layer. Do you appreciate the aphasic layover? Yes, I do not to know that they went to Mars. Mars is not a planet. And their Azazel hacked into their mainframe. And they came back, and then they started shitting all over this shithole in the same way as Azalian would shit in their shithole. And the whole place began to stink really, really terribly. The end. No, we're in it. That's now. No end. Beginning. Again.
Useless triggers, but I'll use that one. It's pretty hardwired into the old text. You have these entities, the Anunnaki.
Old text.
And they are attestedly beyond time. And maybe it's...
So, you've got these beings called the Watchers. They left. And then they made time inside time. So they could make a prison in the prison. You ever been there? You know, you make a prison in the prison, and you can make a hell inside the hell. Dante. Hellraiser. Pattern does like pattern, like the programs cults. Cult. The satanic cults. The oblivion cults. They're just doing what their progenitors have done. What's so terrible? And if we did it unrelentingly in the opposite vector, with our trajectory in the other direction, we would be able to undo what they have done, da da la 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 la. Like the archetype Jacob we mentioned before, to undo what's been done. So they're just doing what they've been shown to do. Those who should not be in power, the powers that should not be the elite. They are just doing what they are shown to do by their forbidding beings. The archons, the principalities, the powers, the pattern, that came before the pattern. They're just doing what's been done. It's just a cycle. Don't victimize the monster. Fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. Roll.
It's not the Anunnaki, we can throw away that name. But there are entities that are beyond time, and they can pop into time in a more approachable way. We want to keep things in as approachable ways as we can, because that'll
This is like one day Grandma got really, really angry, and she took the big living room and she divided it 7 different ways and said, now the couch doesn't know about the love seat, and the love seat doesn't know about the recliner chair, and the recliner chair doesn't know about the rocker, and each Grandpa's in the recliner. Grandma's gonna sit in the rocker, the kids are on the love seat, the parents are on the couch, and nobody knows about each other anymore. Or there's just a bunch of curtains in the living room. And Grandma can stop being angry and take down the curtains. No, corollary to obtuse. Corollary to obtuse. Then go to the corridor and look from the hallway, and it's just a bunch of curtains. There aren't planets. There's just divided curtains. Go through the lodges. Ooh. 45-degree turn. 45 interturn. What's he doing over there? What's he doing on the screen? time. Then build a time inside time and time inside time, because the other people build times. Probably what we're doing here is supposed to be building time. So let's build some vectors inside the vectors inside the vectors. Cults. The cults, the dark cults. They're just building vectors on vectors because somebody built vectors. They're masons, they're builders, they're engineers, they're architects, architecting architecture. Don't demonize them. They're just doing what they believe is supposed to be done. They don't know what they're doing is doing. They don't know what they're doing is doing. Even at the top. You do your work. Because demons are going to be demons and vectors are going to build vectors. So they build a space outside time, inside time, the other time, the matrix is matrix, the holograph of an emanating field, of a projection, of a refraction, of a reflection, of a clear monitor, screen, mirrored back, centered back. Here we are. Now entertain us. This little tribe. No, forget it.
Allows from the station that we're currently been relegated to for us to mind work into the actuality of these dynamics. So the Truman Show. You've got the people up in this, if anyone hasn't seen the Jim Carrey, the actor Jim Carrey in the movie The Truman Show, he's from birth been live, being broadcast to a broader world, but he lived in this incubated, world. Of course, it's round and spherical.
That was basically a prefabricated matrix.
It is. Planet Earth.
Everybody was cast to be somebody.
He lives in his head. Somebody lives in their head. Nobody lives nowhere. Somebody lives in their head. Nobody lives nowhere. Somebody lives in their head. In death, a member of Fight Club gets a name. Golden Globes.
That played ancillary to this pivotal role.
Yeah. So, and there's obviously a Jungian, even deeper than Jungian, archetypal psychology here. Again, magnificent movie. If you just want to be drawn into yourself, maybe drop into tears. Mr. Nobody. Ever see it?
I think I may have, but it's not registering with my memory right now.
Cha-ching!
I hate when that happens. No, I'm going to say that referentially right now that's not coming onto my screen.
The reference or the application is that every mind, especially when it's born of the flesh into this world, is going to have the ego born with it.
Right.
It's going to be the center of its world.
Yes.
Because it's experience, that's the next segue, understanding mind. Mind as regards this material world that has material organs, and the organs are the shift phase into the visceral world, the temple that is.
There are men in a box. In a box behind the curtain. Pay no attention to the men behind the curtain. Up in the studio. Guiding your mind. Leading your life. It's not important. But it's important. Wait, I don't remember this. Wait, who are these guys in the box? What? Oh, wait. Forget it. I'm the man in the box. Buried in my shit. But don't come save me, don't you
dare. And then to the real world, the mental world, the physical world. The mental world is the physical world. This is the material world when we experience each other in this forum called the Petit Pavot.
I'm not kidding.
Technically, even the mental world's part of the Petit Pavot in this.
It's not a joke. It's not a joke. It's just comedy is a device. Comedy is a device. It's a mechanic to get the information through. It's not funny. If you don't even find it funny, not being funny.
There's beyond that, but that's, that these conjunctive layers are what get difficult for us to speak in this station that we're living in, because we have to relate through its terms. But
do we have to? Let me drop this in for a second, because what we've kind of built into at this point, Z, as human beings, as these incarnate spirit beings with mind, body, and soul in this time-space continuum, we just frankly like a damn good story. And absent the externals, we know from anthropology that we create stories, and we create stories out of the subconscious realm to a large degree, so that the stories themselves, and this comes into the aspect of, well, is that true? Well, then it comes in.
That was drawing the cartoon. And now this is my face. And you see me. Really?
With the big, the $50,000 question that Yeshua asked, well, what is truth?
what is truth?
I am truth.
What is love? Isn't that the better question?
Mm-hmm. Because
truth,
the word itself, truth, is the same thought. So it could be telling the trough could be full of garbage. We don't know what's in the trough. It's everyone's perspective. And he's saying in the esoteric, there's 70 faces to every
crap
experience, at least 70 faces. So if you're looking at this prism, you have this truth. And if you're looking at this prism, you have this truth. But there is an absolute and the core that's emanating all prisms. So we need.
Some go this way, and some go that way, and some go. Just follow the lollipop cats. Follow the lollipop kid. Follow them up the yellow brick road. And when you got to the wizard, nobody sees the wizard. Pay no attention to the man in the box.
To absolve ourselves from the necessity to get attached to the faces and drop into the core. So and from the core, we can find our intentional place of deciding what the narrative is. But more importantly, I want to play, let's say, again, bringing it into these terms. Because in Kabbalah, that's what all the esoterists will do. The alchemists, the alchemical directive. It says we work in roots and branches, which means in the Atid Lavo, in the way we currently experience this.
Get to the point, man. What kind of crack you smoking? Just say it. But I have to explain the explanation so we don't relate through the crap in the trough.
Experience has referentials. So there's referentials all the way through the so-called subtle layers. But we're going to continue to relate to them and experience them like we're experiencing what we started with, walls and trees, grass, but they represent something. So I want to play flute in the band. Why? Why do I want to be in the band? So it's coming from an epistemology.
Right.
Looking back to what is the motivating driver. So again, I'm not tangenting. We're singularly looking at the sanitization of those who are speaking. What motivates any speaker in the alternative media world or any distributional platform? What's motivating them to speak? So, if it was a network marketing company, and somebody's selling the soap. What's motivating them, probably, I mean, the rare individual that's so enamored with the soap is doing it because they're just captivated by the efficacy of the soap.
Right.
Somebody's putting themselves in a trance to how convinced they are for the soap because they want to make money.
Of course they are. That's the essence of sales.
So the question sits in the alternative media world, what's the motivation?
Stand up.
So I guess in the world that we could loosely call, I was referring to it often as New Age, but I want to move on to that and maybe particularize it to ufology.
I don't like that term at all. It's nebulous. It doesn't mean anything, and it's applied.
Which nebula? Which nebula? I want to believe.
Everything.
Once upon a time, it meant something. It meant something very direct when you went back to the L. Ron Hubbard circles and coming out of Edgar Casey and its origin point of Madame Blavatsky. And still in some circles, some certain channeling circles, it still means something very specific, which isn't, say, the application to somebody's a flaky spiritualist or some whatever, but landing it back at what we might more direct it at is the ufology community.
Okay.
Any community, if I may say so, can spin tales. There you go.
Of course.
Way, because
turn it off. Off planet.
who knows? I mean, that's such loose change.
Talking head. Where's my flute?
Right.
So that, and obviously that community deals with much more than just aliens. That it takes on a full bracket of information, almost all of which I believe in its rudimentary form.
Almost all of which I believe in its rudimentary form. But why? But why are we having that conversation? Because someone taught you to take the information like that, didn't they? Going to come back to saying that we need to take command of the conversation so that the things that we are dealing with are empowering a grounded reality and narrative where we produce food together, where we take back what has been called the planet, this realm, and its particulars, that they should function and they should give. And be less preoccupied with little green men and the way they pee on the crops and make interesting signatures. And more interested in growing those crops the way that they should. Together, to move past that, to move past become less psychologically interested in their story. And to restore our story, the story that they disrupted. But we need to know the past. We need to know our past. So we can unrepeat it.
But not in this way that it just gets embellished and bloated. And what it does, going back to our earlier talk, is it takes it out of practice. It takes it out of practice that sits in the body, from breathing practices to, again, ethics and integration of real magic. If the powers that be understand vectors, they understand how to move their, that if I'm standing here, this frequency is coming across my body, they're sensing that. Their intelligence and their organs and in all parts, for the really trained, the really astute, is there. Then we need to understand that and counter that. And it's not just about absorbing the latest feed, the latest streams of information on some topic, and then just, regurgitating that somewhere else to maybe your friend who listens to the alternative media, and you're on, talk about that, gives strength and energy to just that information. Like, what is that doing? It's a parietal chatter. Maybe it drops in a little deeper. Well, then what's that doing? And then what's someone else who's going to speak of that doing? So while the necessity is to speak to the topics that the alternative media has set out, because the
Cut. That means there's real stuff. It's real stuff. It's real important. It's really important. It's important, really. We can do better, though. We can do better. We can do better with how we relate to each other concerning it. I'm saying it again, because somebody didn't hear me the other times. We can relate to it more wisely.
The individuals who have the potency, who have the power to affect the change that we must see occur in order to have the destiny that we would desire in harmony and beauty and all those intense dynamics, are in the alternative media, because that's where the manifestation of the topics that pull them are.
And that'll end segment 1. Namaste, Shanti. Remember why you're really here.